She fought hard. Every court appearance, every supervised visit, every character evaluation, she showed up. With pressed clothes, a forced smile, and a binder full of proof that she could be the mother her children needed. To the court, Meredith Langford was a symbol of perseverance, a woman reclaiming her life after a failed marriage to a man who drank too much and cared too little. She convinced the judge. She convinced the therapists. She convinced almost everyone. Except her ex-husband Brent, who stood outside the courthouse after losing custody and said into a local reporter's mic, "No one sees what she hides. I'm scared for them." Days later, those words would haunt everyone who had once believed Meredith's recovery story. Because what came next wasn't a lapse in judgment or a tragic accident. It was a decision. Cold. Final. But the question still echoes across Tennessee: why fight so hard to get them back, only to take them away forever? To understand what led to the tragedy inside that quiet Knoxville rental house, you have to go back, to the beginning, before courtrooms, before headlines, before two little coffins carried out of a home that should have been a safe haven. Meredith Langford grew up in Cookeville, Tennessee, a place where people knew your family name, where Sunday dinners were sacred, and where reputations stuck like glue. From an early age, Meredith was described as bright but intense. She excelled in school but struggled with friendships. She had a habit of internalizing every slight, every offhand comment, turning them over in her mind until they became wounds. By her early 20s, she had been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, which she managed with therapy and medication. In 2012, at a friend's engagement party, Meredith met Brent Holloway. He was older by 6 years, confident, charismatic in a casual way, and had just begun working as a corrections officer at a regional facility outside of Nashville. At first, Meredith was drawn to his stability. He didn't flinch at her anxious habits. He listened when she talked about panic attacks. To Meredith, Brent seemed like a rock, a steady hand in a chaotic world. They married a year later. And for a while, life looked almost ordinary. They bought a modest house in Lebanon. Meredith stayed home after the birth of their first child, Isabel, in 2014. Caleb followed 2 years later. But something began to shift. Brent's charm wore thin when pressure mounted. He started drinking, first a little, then a lot. He'd come home late from his shift, smelling like whiskey and resentment. Meredith, now managing 2 toddlers, began to retreat. Her anxiety, which had remained mostly manageable, surged. There were nights when she'd lock herself in the bathroom and cry quietly into a towel while the baby monitor lit up from the hallway. Family friends started noticing the changes. Meredith's once colorful social media pages turned quiet. She declined invitations. When she did show up, she was tired, twitchy, and quick to defend Brent. "He's just under a lot of pressure," she'd say. "The job's brutal. You wouldn't believe what he sees in there." But the cracks widened. Arguments turned volatile. Neighbors once called the police after a loud dispute spilled onto the front lawn, Meredith screaming, Brent yelling for her to grow up and stop acting like a lunatic. No arrests were made. Just a report filed, never followed up. In 2019, Meredith filed for separation. What followed wasn't just a divorce, it was a war. Brent fought for full custody of the kids. He painted Meredith as mentally unstable, citing her medication and emotional outbursts. He brought up the police report and a journal entry she had once shared with a friend in confidence, pages filled with dark thoughts and worries about her ability to cope. Meredith fired back. She claimed Brent used control as a weapon. That he isolated her from friends, forbade her from taking up work, and would call her names in front of the children. Her attorneys submitted photos, red eyes, a bruised wrist, scrawled notes she claimed were left for her in rage. But much of it was circumstantial. Brent, for all his flaws, had no criminal record. He showed up clean, dressed in crisp button-down shirts, with witnesses ready to testify to his role as a steady father figure. Meanwhile, Meredith's mental health became both the sword and shield. Her team argued she was stable, in treatment, and deeply bonded to the children. Brent's team countered that her stability was conditional. A mask she wore when necessary, but one that slipped too often behind closed doors. For 3 years, the court filings piled up. Meredith was granted supervised visits. Then joint custody. Parenting classes were ordered. A court-appointed therapist was assigned. Her progress was documented in spreadsheets and caseworker notes. Eventually, in early 2023, the judge ruled in her favor. If you're drawn to stories that unravel the darkest corners of the human mind, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Every click helps uncover the truth that lies beneath the silence. The final court hearing was quiet. The decision hinged on a line buried in the ruling: the mother has shown consistent and sustained progress over a sufficient time to warrant full custodial responsibility. To the outside world, Meredith had won. But Brent didn't celebrate. "You just gave her permission to self-destruct with them in the car," he told a reporter later. His face had looked hollow that day, like something had drained from him entirely. He told friends he feared for his children's safety, not because he believed Meredith would hurt them on purpose, but because he didn't think she was capable of managing life on her own. "You can't hand a drowning person a child and call it a rescue," he said in one interview. She was still sinking. The call came in at 6:42 a.m. on a fog-wrapped Thursday morning. It was a neighbor, a retired teacher named Ruth Whitley, who phoned 911 after noticing something unusual. Meredith Langford's back door was wide open, swinging slightly in the breeze. Ruth had walked her schnauzer past that house every morning for years and knew Meredith to be a cautious mother, shades drawn, doors locked, always hovering near her children. That morning, though, the curtains in the living room were ripped half off, and a bedroom lamp had crashed to the floor near the hallway window. Ruth told dispatch, "Something's not right over there. That door's been open since I passed by at 5:30. Lights on. No movement. Just stillness." When Officer Dakota Rayner arrived 8 minutes later, he didn't expect what he would find inside the modest rental on Stonehaven Lane. The home smelled faintly of lavender cleaner and stale coffee. A child's shoe lay by the base of the stairs. The television was on, tuned to a children's streaming channel, the volume low. On the screen, animated characters laughed obliviously. Then he saw the blood. Not a lot, just streaks. Thin lines trailing up the carpeted stairs like someone had tried to clean it in a panic. He called for backup immediately and ascended the staircase alone. What he found in the upstairs bedroom would never leave him. Meredith Langford was seated on the floor, back against the wall, legs splayed awkwardly. Her wrists were slit, both of them, shallow but deliberate. She was alive, barely conscious, her breathing erratic. A bloodied kitchen knife lay on the nightstand beside a stack of children's drawings. But the real horror lay in the next room. Isabel, age 9, and Caleb, age 7, were found in their twin beds, neatly tucked in, covers drawn up, as if they had gone to sleep and never woken. But there were signs. Dried blood at the corners of their mouths. Minor bruising along their jawlines. An empty bottle of prescription sleep medication in the bathroom trash. A note lay between them, scrawled in rushed handwriting: "They'll be safe now. No more fear. No more courts. No more tears." The house was immediately secured as a crime scene. Meredith was rushed to Parkridge Medical Center under police escort. Though sedated and unresponsive, she was placed under suicide watch. Officers taped off the property, erected white tents in the driveway, and began processing what would soon become one of the most talked about cases in Tennessee in over a decade. The press caught wind of the story by that afternoon. By evening, helicopters circled overhead. Reporters clustered on the sidewalk. One woman from a Nashville news station whispered live into her mic, "Authorities believe this may have been a murder-suicide attempt. We are told 2 children are deceased, and their mother has been hospitalized in critical condition." Online, the narrative fractured instantly. Some called Meredith a monster. Others blamed the system. A few pointed fingers at Brent Holloway, claiming that he must have driven her to it. Brent, when reached by reporters later that day, could only shake his head and repeat, "I told them. I told the court this would happen." No one listened. Back inside the house, forensic teams got to work. The medical examiner's preliminary report confirmed the children had been given a high dose of zolpidem, an adult-grade sedative not prescribed to Meredith but likely obtained illegally. Traces of crushed pills were found in an open juice bottle on Isabel's nightstand. There were no signs of forced entry, no defensive wounds, and no indication the children had been moved post-mortem. Detectives found more troubling clues in Meredith's bedroom. Her laptop browser history revealed recent searches, lethal dose of sleeping medication, how to make children fall asleep fast, and, can a mother lose custody after mental breakdown? One search stood out, typed in at 2:13 a.m., just hours before the crime, "Is death the only way to protect your kids from a cruel world?" A suicide note, written in Meredith's handwriting, was found in her locked nightstand. It read more like a manifesto than a goodbye. "No one understands what it's like to be told you're unstable every day. No one sees the tears you cry in closets, the nights you stay awake begging God to make you better. They just see a crazy woman and take your babies. Well, now they're safe. No judge, no Brent, no more pain. Just peace." Meanwhile, detectives began piecing together the timeline. Phone records showed that Meredith had made no outgoing calls after 8 p.m. the night before. Her last text was to her sister. "Everything hurts. I'm tired." A timestamp showed it was sent at 9:48 p.m. Her sister, Dana Langford, later told investigators she hadn't thought much of the message. "Meredith was always dramatic," she explained in an interview. "I thought it was just another bad day. I never imagined." The investigation intensified when Brent arrived at the police station the following evening, hands shaking. He was not under arrest, but he demanded to speak with the lead detective. What he said in that interview sent ripples through the case. Brent claimed Meredith had called him 4 days earlier, sobbing, panicked, begging him to take the kids for the weekend. He refused, citing the court order and his belief that she needed to step up and parent. When he asked if she was taking her medication, she screamed at him and hung up. "She said something that keeps ringing in my ears," Brent told the detective. "She said, 'You'll be sorry. You'll see what I mean when I'm gone.' I thought it was just another threat. I didn't think she meant this." The 13th day after the fire was gray, cold, and silent. Outside the psychiatric wing of Parkridge Medical Center in Chattanooga, the air was still. No sirens. No noise. Just the quiet clicks of camera shutters and the low murmurs of reporters staking out the hospital's side exit. They had been tipped off, someone from inside had whispered the time and the route. Everyone knew what was coming. At exactly 2:47 p.m., a pair of unmarked black cruisers pulled up. And then, flanked by 2 officers and a nurse, Meredith Langford emerged. She was in a wheelchair, pale as the overcast sky above her. A gray sweatshirt swallowed her thin frame, her wrists were cuffed in soft restraints, and her eyes, once so warm and full of life, were shielded by state-issued sunglasses. She didn't speak. She didn't look at anyone. She simply stared straight ahead as the world around her erupted in chaos. "Meredith, did you kill your children?" one reporter yelled. "Do you regret what you did?" another shouted. "Are you insane, Meredith?" But Meredith Langford said nothing. The image of her being pushed into that cruiser would be burned into the national consciousness. It would flash across TV screens, dominate social media feeds, and fuel the most painful debates. Was she a murderer? Or a mother broken by a system that never listened? That afternoon, District Attorney Pamela Greaves took the podium. Flanked by detectives and child advocates, she looked directly into the cameras and read the charges with calm authority. Meredith Langford is being formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated child abuse, and 1 count of attempted suicide under conditions of harm to minors. Her voice never wavered. Her eyes didn't blink. She added, "We will pursue justice for the victims, Liam and Ava Holloway. They were innocent children who deserved protection. And instead, they were taken." But while some applauded her firmness, others were horrified. Almost instantly, an online petition began circulating titled, "Justice for Meredith." Thousands signed it within 24 hours. Mental health advocates, trauma survivors, single mothers, even social workers, many of them saw Meredith as a cautionary tale, not a villain. "This woman was crying for help for years," one commenter wrote. "She called the system, begged them to intervene. And they didn't. Now they want to put her to death for their failure." But Brent Holloway, the father of those 2 children, had no sympathy left. "I warned them. I begged the court not to leave my kids with her. I knew something like this would happen," he told the press. His voice trembled. His eyes were bloodshot. "But no one listened. And now my babies are gone." By the time Meredith was formally arraigned, the courthouse had become a battlefield of public opinion. Protesters lined the sidewalks. Some held signs with angel wings and the names Ava and Liam. Others shouted, "Mental illness is not murder." Inside, the courtroom was tense. Meredith appeared in a beige prison uniform, her hands trembling slightly as she stood behind the defense table. Her attorney, a sharp, calm woman named Kyra Harlan, stood beside her. The charges were read. The room held its breath. And then Meredith whispered her plea, "Not guilty by reason of insanity." The courtroom gasped. Someone in the back began to cry. From that moment on, the battle wasn't just about what Meredith had done. It was about why. Pamela Greaves, the DA, moved quickly. She framed the case as cold, calculated, and deliberate. She pointed to Meredith's manifesto. Those chilling handwritten notes about setting them free and ending the spiral. She cited Meredith's own words to doctors after the fire, "At least now I'll have them forever." To Greaves, that was the heart of the case. This wasn't an act of desperation, she said to the cameras. This was an act of domination. She didn't want to lose her kids to their father. She didn't want to live without them. So she made sure neither would happen. But defense attorney Kyra Harlan saw something else. She began digging through Meredith's entire life, her medical records, her 911 calls, her psychiatric evaluations, her custody battle, her therapy notes. And what she found was a timeline of decline. There were hospital visits in 2017, right after Ava was born, complaints of hallucinations, sleep paralysis, and auditory delusions. There were notes from a therapist describing deep postpartum psychosis exacerbated by isolation. There were warning signs Meredith herself had tried to report. Texts to friends saying she felt like she was being watched, calls to Brent saying she couldn't hear her own thoughts over the noise. And then, the 911 calls. There were 5 of them, all placed by Meredith in the 6 months before the fire. Each one more frantic than the last. "Please help. I can't tell if the voices are real. I'm scared I'll hurt someone. I'm scared I'll hurt myself. I don't feel safe with my kids right now." But no intervention came. No social worker followed up. No psychiatric team visited. The system, already overloaded and understaffed, chalked her up as another overwhelmed single mom. Join our growing community of true crime thinkers and storytellers. Hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share this story with someone who won't sleep tonight. And that, Kyra Harlan argued, was the real crime. She wasn't hiding this, Harlan said to the press. She knew she was unraveling. She asked for help. And they left her alone. If anyone failed these children, it was all of us. Still, the prosecution pressed forward. They brought in a fire marshal who testified that the blaze had been, clearly intentional, set using gasoline from the family's shed. They produced photos of the children's room, where fire had burned a perfect circle around their bunk bed, as if the flames had been meant to reach them first. They even introduced evidence that Meredith had searched "How long does it take to die in a fire?" just days before the tragedy. Greaves painted Meredith as not just unwell, but obsessed. She became fixated on the idea that the world was poison, she argued. And instead of seeking help, she made herself judge, jury, and executioner of her children's lives. Meanwhile, Harlan responded with expert witnesses, psychiatrists who testified that Meredith had been in a full dissociative break. That she likely believed she was saving her children from a fate worse than death. That her brain was not working in reality. One expert, Dr. Elaine Marker, told the jury, to Meredith Langford, the world wasn't on fire because of her. It was on fire, and she was simply trying to keep her children from burning. The media frenzy only grew. National headlines debated whether Meredith was a monster or a martyr. Cable news panels argued every nuance of insanity. And public trust in the child welfare system began to crack. But just when the trial seemed to be reaching its climax, something unexpected happened. Something no one could have predicted. By the time the trial of Meredith Langford officially began, the entire country was watching. It was standing room only inside courtroom 7B of the Hamilton County Courthouse. The wooden pews were packed with reporters, activists, law students, grieving parents, and curiosity seekers. Outside, cameras from every major network lined the marble steps. Commentators called it the Mother Fire case. Others simply referred to it as the trial of grief. And at the center of it all sat Meredith, pale, silent, and still. Wearing a black cardigan over her prison uniform, her hands neatly folded in her lap. She didn't look at the jury. She didn't look at her ex-husband. She just stared down at the floor, as if waiting for judgment not from the court, but from something far more eternal. The trial opened with the prosecution laying out a story of calculated destruction. They called it a premeditated act of murder by a mother who saw her children not as people, but as extensions of her own despair. District Attorney Pamela Greaves took center stage. Her opening statement was precise, almost surgical. She described how Meredith had been locked in a bitter custody battle with Brent Holloway. How she had allegedly grown resentful of the court's involvement. How she had Googled suicide methods, drawn disturbing sketches of fire surrounding a house, and written journal entries like, "If I can't protect them from this world, I'll take them out of it." Greaves pointed to the matches, the gasoline, the boarded windows. She played the 911 call from that night, those gut-wrenching seconds of the neighbor screaming, the sound of flames crackling, and then, silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, turning to the jury, "this wasn't a cry for help. This was an execution." Then the witnesses came. The fire chief testified that the accelerant had been poured in strategic places, near the kids' bunk beds, the hallway, the front door. A neighbor recalled Meredith whispering, "They're safe now," while being loaded into the ambulance. A teacher from Ava's preschool broke down in tears remembering the little girl's voice, "My mommy said we'll never be scared again." But then, the defense rose. And everything began to shift. Kyra Harlan stood quietly at the podium, a folder of Meredith's psychiatric history in her hands. Her tone wasn't angry, it was mournful. "This case isn't about evil," she began softly. "It's about illness. Severe, untreated, and ignored mental illness." She walked the jury through Meredith's descent. The postpartum psychosis. The hallucinations. The repeated emergency calls. The CPS reports never followed up. The friends and family who dismissed her as overwhelmed. The therapist who had warned a caseworker, only to be told, "We'll check in next month." Then she turned to Meredith. This woman didn't wake up one day and decide to kill her children. She broke. And she asked for help. Over and over. And no one answered. The courtroom was quiet. So quiet you could hear someone crying in the back row. Then came the most anticipated part of the trial, Meredith's mental state at the time of the crime. The prosecution brought in their own expert, a stoic psychologist named Dr. Abel Montrose, who argued that while Meredith had clear mental health issues, she knew right from wrong. She locked the doors. She waited until neighbors were asleep. She even turned off the smoke alarms, he said. That's not the behavior of someone in a psychotic episode. That's planning. But the defense had its own star witness, Dr. Elaine Marker, a leading expert in trauma-based psychosis. Dr. Marker testified that Meredith had entered what's known as protective delusional psychosis, a condition in which the brain constructs an alternate reality to shield itself from emotional destruction. Meredith believed she was saving her children from a demonic world. To her, death was salvation, not harm, she explained. She described how unmedicated psychosis can warp time, space, logic. How it can convince a mother that fire is light, not pain. That her children will float to heaven, not burn. Then came the most dramatic moment of the trial. The defense played an audio recording, one never before heard by the public. It was Meredith's therapy session from just 2 months before the fire. Her voice was fragile, trembling. Sometimes I see their faces melting. Not in real life, in my mind. I think, maybe it's a warning. Or maybe it's my fault. Maybe I'm broken. I don't know how to stop it. I don't want to be alive if I hurt them. The courtroom held its breath. Even Brent Holloway, sitting in the front row with clenched fists, bowed his head. The media exploded. Some headlines called the trial a masterclass in psychological warfare. Others asked, if this isn't insanity, what is? Twitter trended with hashtags like #SaveMeredith and #JusticeForAva and Liam, turning the courtroom into a national referendum on mental health and maternal responsibility. Still, the prosecution pressed on. They reminded the jury that Meredith had lied to police during the initial investigation, claiming she didn't remember the fire, only to later confess in a whisper, "I wanted peace." They showed photos of Ava and Liam's charred toys. Their singed pajamas. They brought in Brent to testify. He stood before the jury, his voice tight with rage and sorrow. "They were my babies. I would have taken them. She just had to let me. But she didn't. She chose fire instead of family. It was devastating." By the time closing arguments arrived, the jury was exhausted. Everyone was. Greaves asked them to remember the victims. Not Meredith's pain, but the children's, she said. They had no choice. She made sure of that. Harlan, in her final words, simply asked, if Meredith Langford doesn't qualify for an insanity plea, then no one does. And then, the jury disappeared behind the deliberation door. These stories deserve to be heard. If this case moved you, support the truth. Subscribe, like, and share it forward. Someone out there needs to hear it.